So before I start, I actually just want to recognize that it's Friday tonight, which can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But just talking to a lot of my friends today, I think it is important to say that one of the things that Friday means is that there were Friday protests in Gaza today. And 2 Palestinians were killed in those protests, and quite a lot others were injured. And I was talking to a few friends who were at the Israeli protests. In the last few weeks, Israeli activists, including myself, have been going to the fence near Gaza and trying to get as close as we can and kind of protest on the Israeli side of the fence. And it's a very strange experience because I'm used to different kinds of protests, including ones that are rather violent in the West Bank as far as the military is concerned. But this is a completely different situation in which we're standing as close as we can to the border fence, and we're being pushed back by soldiers and stuff like that, but generally very calm, very nice, very kind. And literally 200 meters away, we can hear the shots being fired, right? We can see the ambulances from the other side of the fence, and it's this completely surreal situation where you don't really know what you can do, but you're seeing people being killed, right? And it's this feeling of what can we do in this situation? And I think just kind of placing us in the time that we're in what happens right now, what literally happened today is important. But also for me, one of the experiences that I keep having there is because our side of the protests are pretty calm, and I have to say surprisingly calm from the Israeli military side as well. It's even a stranger experience because we get to speak to the soldiers, and it's literally the same units that have their snipers up shooting, right? It's the same unit that comes and tries to make sure that we don't get closer to the border fence, and we speak to them, and they're pretty kind, polite 19-year-old kids. And I think that a lot of, generally for me, trying to understand occupation, trying to understand how does this thing continue, is trying to understand how a group of kind, polite 19-year-old kids can shoot people. And when I try to kind of think of how to explain it, I think it's impossible to try to understand how these narratives are created from the outside, because we're just born into it. It's everywhere. It's all around us. It's anything from when you walk out of your house when you're a 2-year-old child that doesn't really speak or understand much around you, but some of what you're used to seeing around you are guns and assault rifles, and that's just part of the environment around you. I was living in a city up north near the border with Lebanon, and the entrance to the city has 3 tanks. And they're green, pink, and yellow. And, kids climb on them and play, and it's all fun and games. But that's part of how we see weapons, right? This completely normal thing, part of everyday life, a positive part of everyday life, right? We're taught that weapons, guns, are about our security. We're supposed to see them in a positive way. And when I say we, I mean us as Israeli Jews. That doesn't go for everyone who lives in that land, right? Palestinians seeing the exact same guns are supposed to feel fear where I feel security. And important for me to say, this is not just an Israeli phenomena, right? Anywhere you go in the world, the question of if you see a gun held by a police officer or by a soldier, what do you feel? If you feel safe or if you feel afraid, says a lot about where you are in the power structure of that society, right? And I think that many times, especially speaking to Mennonites and others, there's a feeling that, we're all critical of guns in public sphere, right? We all have our opinions about it and so on. There's a difference between being critical of it and what is the emotion that it creates in you, right? And I feel pretty comfortable saying that the white people in this room, when you see an armed police officer, you are not afraid. You cannot agree, but you're not afraid. Because you know, and you've been socialized, that it is about protecting you. And people of color usually have different experiences of what those weapons mean. And obviously in every culture and society, those divisions will be different, but I think it is important to say they're everywhere. And in our context, what that means is that so many guns in public space are supposed to make me feel safe and are supposed to make Talik feel afraid constantly. And the normalization of guns is not just the fact that guns are there, it's the fact that they're part of everyday life. They become something that's not threatening, that's neutral. I was reading this second grade math book in which there were two questions. There was a question that said, in a pack of chocolate, there are 40 pieces of chocolate. In 4 lines, how many rows are there? And then the next question is, in a unit of soldiers, there's 27 soldiers. In 3 lines, how many rows are there? And you're like, what? How is that? How do we have chocolate and soldiers one after the other? But we do, because it's just as natural to us. Just another example of what that looks like is this worksheet that was given to kids in kindergarten to teach them how to count. And you have your tanks and your airplanes. The thing in the bottom is the symbol of the Israeli military. And then you have olive branches and doves and, Knesset, our parliament, and the flag of Israel, and all these random things together that don't seem to make sense together. Like, what's the common denominator here? But if you ask Israelis, they will all tell you exactly what the common denominator is. This is a really easy question for us. Does anyone here have ideas for what's the common denominator? The person putting that all together, what were they thinking?
These are all patriotic symbols, aren't they?
All patriotic symbols. You ask Israelis, what is that? And they tell you, that's Israel. Right? The visualization of the state is its institutions and its symbols and the military. You go to Google Images and write Israel, see what comes up. Right? You'll get a flag and a map, which is true for more or less any country in the world. And then you'll get pictures of soldiers, the military. That's how we visually see what the state is. And it really goes to the roots of what Zionism is. I mean, Zionism was the idea of creating a state for Jews with all this narrative of kind of counter-persecution is about creating a military for Jews, right? It's about creating a situation where Jews can protect themselves physically. So militarization is really at the core of what our identity is. And that means that, yes, you construct it in different ways through the education system. Through high school, it's literally everywhere. I mean, you'll have soldiers coming in and out of different classrooms explaining about the different units. You have a week of kind of basic training in the 11th grade. So you go out to a military camp and play soldier for a week in uniform, learn how to shoot. That's all part of school activity. Schools today are actually, or teachers, are incentivized. It's a new kind of reform of the education system in which at the end of the year, teachers are measured by the increase of excellence of their students. And teachers who do well get incentivized, right? A really nice way of saying they get paid for it. That's measured in 2 ways. One of them is academic, so the grades of your students go up. And the other one is social responsibility. And in social responsibility, one of the things that they measure is enlistment rates, right? More of your students go to the military as a teacher, you'll be paid for it, right? It's very clearly part of the system. And one of my, I just really love this picture because it really exemplifies it. This is a picture that was taken from the Facebook page of the Ministry sorry, I keep confusing Ministry of Education and Ministry of Defense. I don't know why that happens to me. The Ministry of Education, in which the head of the South District of the military is retiring. That's the general over there. And he had a nice goodbye thing from the head of the South District of the Ministry of Education. And they were thanking each other for years of cooperation. And part of this thank you was also a farewell gift. And the farewell gift there is this framed picture that has 3 photos in it. And I don't know how well you can actually see the photos. But the photo on the far left is, yes. On the left is a sculpture that's in the old city of Jerusalem today. And what it shows is Jews taking out relics from the Second Temple as it's being destroyed. The picture in the middle, very iconic picture of the child from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising surrendering at the end of the uprising. And the last picture is the picture of Israeli paratroopers in the Wailing Wall in 1967. And putting those three pictures in a row tells a story. We used to be weak and now we're strong, right? There's a circle closing at the end of it, right? The destruction of the Second Temple is exile, right? That's the point where you lose the sovereignty of the state, and obviously it ends with you regaining it, reoccupying the temple. And the middle of it is a story of persecution, right? There was this historical religious persecution of Jews for thousands of years. The Holocaust is obviously the worst example of what that can possibly look like. But we found a solution at the end of that. And a lot of the narrative of what Israel is that. It's about the solution at the end of it. That there's this running joke on Jewish holidays that they're all kind of the same. I don't know if you know this, but right? So at Jewish holidays, mainly the story is someone tried to kill us, God saves us, let's eat. That's how it works. And you learn that in every holiday that someone's trying to kill you. You always have this feeling of someone trying to kill you. And it's a narrative that's created. And like many things with religion, you can emphasize different things, right? Different narratives. And for us, the narrative that is created is about that. That is the thing that we always need to remember. There's a month in the Hebrew calendar around April and May, which we call the Memorial Month, which has Holocaust Memorial Day and has Soldiers Memorial Day and all of these memorial days. And a friend of mine took a picture in a school. First graders had this plaque in the middle of the school during that month that in the middle said, "Who tried to kill us?" And then it had different lines to all these people who tried to kill us. So it has Pharaoh, the bad guy from the Exodus, from Passover. It had Haman, who's the bad guy from Purim, another holiday. And then it had the Romans and the Greeks. So we're still kind of 2,000 years ago. And then it has Ahmadinejad, right? We somehow fast forwarded. It had Hitler, obviously. It had the Arabs. There's this complete mixture of history, present day, religious people, individuals, groups, whatever. That they're not the point, right? The point is someone's always trying to kill you. And if you grow up into that narrative, I grew up in Jerusalem, Second Intifada, buses blowing up on the streets, people are trying to kill you. And you feel that, and it feeds into the narrative that you already have. And I think that one of the saddest things about that narrative is that it means that as a society, we never have to stop and ask, why? Why is this happening? You know, it's the fall of 2015. I remember there were two girls from Hebron. They were 14 and 16 years old, and they came into Jerusalem with scissors and tried to stab people. One of them was shot dead, and the other one was severely injured. And they knew that they would be shot and possibly killed. That was what was happening in all of these cases in Jerusalem. And the first thing that I would like us to do as a society is ask why. Like, why would a 14-year-old girl go and do that? And maybe we'd find out there's an occupation going on, right? Like, maybe that would actually give us some answers, but we don't need to ask why. Because we know why. Everyone's always tried to kill us. There's no question about it. It also means that there's no solution to it, right? The only solutions we think of are about kind of security-based solutions, military-based solutions that are about symptom solutions, right? We don't think in concepts of peace, of sustainability, of anything that's about actually trying to solve a problem, because the problem is never specific. It's this general idea of anti-Semitism. It's a thing that's always there. It's this cosmic, almost, idea. And it means that our entire political system thinks in that way. More than that, our entire political system are ex-soldiers, right? Like if everyone in the society is a soldier, then obviously your political system is also. More than that, the military service is very much valued in Israeli society, which means that many people will run their political campaigns based on their military service. If you look at the Ministry of Defense, since 1967 until today, we've had 2 ministers of defense who were not high-ranking generals before becoming ministers of defense, right? It's almost seen as the next rank up. So you take our previous Minister of Defense, Moshe Ya'alon, drafted at the age of 18, served in the military for a few good decades, retired somewhere in his 60s after becoming Chief of Staff, and then went to be Minister of Defense. You give someone like that a problem, I don't know, rockets coming in from Gaza. Sure, they're going to give you a military solution. They've literally done nothing else in their lives but be soldiers. They're going to think like soldiers. But that's our entire political system, our entire society in many ways, right? And it keeps us stuck in a place that is very hard to kind of step out of. But I think that when we talk about militarization, it's important to talk also about some of the more structural issues and not just the kind of psychological ones. If we go back to the protests in Gaza today, one of the things that we saw happening in these protests, a few months ago, Palestinians managed to stone down, I guess I would say instead of shoot down, stone down a drone. Drones have been used quite a lot, both for surveillance in that context, in other contexts for bombings, and in this context specifically for shooting tear gas. Right, so they managed to shoot this drone down, and so we finally got pictures of them, and what we saw is a Chinese-made drone that was connected to it a Canadian-made mechanism that allows us to shoot US-made tear gas at Palestinians, right? And it sounds like a beginning of a joke, and there's going to be a rabbi and a priest walking into a bar in a minute, but that's the reality that we're living in, right? You have all these different international corporations that are involved in military industries that gain to profit every time there's a protest that is being suppressed in Gaza. And if we look kind of what the numbers of what that means, Israeli economy is becoming more and more dependent on military spendings, on military export. So Israel today is between the 6th and 8th biggest exporter of arms in the world in absolute numbers. Calculate that per GDP or per capita is the #1 exporter of arms in the world. And we have to ask ourselves, how is that possible? It's a pretty small country and not very industrial. We don't have a lot of heavy industry. Today we're talking about 60% of drones sold in the world in the 20 years that they've checked here were from Israel. That is crazy, right? That's in absolute numbers. That's not per capita, not per anything. That's crazy if we think of kind of like, again, pretty small and not very heavy industry country. But you have this quote from a marketer that kind of explains what is it that allows this market to grow so much. So the quote says that a scenario in which there won't be a big military operation in 20 years will severely harm the arms industries, right? What we need to make sure that this industry continues are large military operations. Someone here said already battle proven, but it's important to say that a lot of Israel's military industry is based on the ability to test, develop, but more importantly, market weapons as battle proven, right? So you have this poster here on the right of the Hermes 450 bomber drone of Elbit Systems. It's a drone that's been in use for quite some time. Literally on the poster that sells it, you'll see on the top right corner a yellow stamp that says battle proven. That's literally how you sell weapons, right? On the left, what you see is a list of military systems that had their first operational debut during the attack on Gaza in 2014. There's an expo selling those less than a month after the operation ended. And again, this is not just about creating the technology, and many times we have this idea that Israel has really good technology. A lot of it is an idea in our head. What Israel has that other countries don't is not necessarily better technology or better minds or better ability to develop things. It's the ability to actually show you all the time that it works, right? And there's a label connected to the Israeli military. Everyone knows it's one of the best militaries in the world and all of that. God knows what that means. But we do know that that means that what they choose to use, the weapons that they choose to use must be good because it's a good military. Right? And we will be able to see what those weapons actually do, and that's value, right? That has a market value and increases the market value of products, which means that for a Canadian company, having their system connect the tear gas to the drone is a great thing. It's not just that they sold that system. They also will be able to later on say, look, that's what it knows how to do, and it's actually operational, and it's not theoretical. And that's how weapons are sold around the world. If we continue, it's not I mean, it really is kind of all around the world. It's not just weapons, it's technology, it's surveillance. There was a UN report that was looking at South Sudan and the torturing of dissidents there, and saw that a lot of the technology, the cyber, the ability to find people was based on Israeli technology. Right? So it's not just guns, it's not just the things that we see, it's also what people call homeland security, which is a really nice way of saying controlling civilian populations, that Israel has a huge part in worldwide, right? The fence between, the border wall between the US and Mexico, which we love, blaming Trump for, but started in the Obama administration, is also with Israeli companies that develop the technology for the fence on Palestinians and then can sell it to different places around the world. And today, this is what sells, okay? In the last decade, I don't remember the exact number of how many walls and fences were built around the world, but this is what's happening right now, everywhere. And Israel can sell that. And more than that, it means that Israel has an interest of making people interested in that, okay? So it's not just a question of what does that do to Palestinians, but also what does it do to other communities, including here in Canada. The picture there is of the drone that I was talking about, so you can ignore that. But when the protests in Gaza just started 2 months in, there was the biggest protest during the move of the US Embassy to Jerusalem that was also coincided with Nakba Day, in which Israel killed 63 people, Palestinians, in those protests. Others also succumbed to their injuries later on. That was a pretty big deal, right? Enough to make the headlines, unlike the people who are killed today. And then we had this Israeli politician who was giving an interview to CBC, and so made the comparison to Canada and said, Canada would do the exact same thing. Now I'm going to ask you as Canadians, would it? I mean, you'd like to believe that it wouldn't, hopefully, and we obviously don't know exactly, but would like to say that that's maybe not the case. But I think that one of the important things to think about is, for instance, Israel has quite a substantial cooperation of training and military cooperation with Canadian forces, including public security, your police forces. What do you think they're training them in? Right? Israel expertise is based on their expertise against Palestinians. It's based on controlling civilian populations. So that's what they're going to train your police force to do. So, I mean, I don't see right now, people on your southern border going to protest the wall and trying to come through. That might happen if things continue as they are. So I don't know if we'll have to test if these police forces will or will not shoot protesters. But what is clear is that language in which control of population is something that you should be doing, that arms and military is part of how you do it, that is a thing that's being exported, and yes, also affects your communities in different places. Now, I like Tarek, I don't like to leave it on a kind of a sad note, although these things are rather sad and depressing. But I think that there's a lot of optimism out of this. In 2014, just before the attack on Gaza, in the spring of 2014, Israeli police, border police, trained police in St. Louis, in the US. And a few months later, Ferguson happened, and that police force did what they were trained to do, right? And we all saw what that looked like. The other side of that is that Palestinian activists were tweeting their counterparts in Ferguson on how to deal with the tear gas and with the tactics of the military, because they know how to deal with it. And it built this alliance of people that's not just solidarity, that's not just, I want to be in solidarity with you because I care about your struggle, but that comes from a place of we're struggling together. We actually understand that these mechanisms are working against us jointly, and we can resist that. And I think that kind of solidarity that is being drawn in different places around the world is very powerful and really something that we can kind of build off of. And I think that's, for me at least, a lot of the reason that it is important for me to have these conversations around the world and say, don't just be in solidarity with Palestine for Palestine's sake. We don't need that. What we need is to actually be part of the same struggle. It says there are things that we will not agree with and that we will make sure that we are both not complicit in and can work together to try to change that reality around us. So thank you. I'm gonna get Tarek back up here.